wood does not just grow on trees, you know. It also comes out of old warehouses, old buildings of any kind, old bridges. What I'm talking about is reclaimed wood. What this deal is that at some point, a long time ago, something got built. Today that something is going to be torn down, and instead of just taking a bulldozer to the building, somebody goes in there and painstakingly removes it a board at a time, makes it available so that we can buy it and reuse it. I really, really love working with this stuff. I've worked with a gazillion different species, from exotic imported stuff to North American hardwoods, but of all of those materials I've touched in my life, reclaimed wood continues to be my favorite. And see if I can convince you about this. First off, what are we talking about here? So again, reclaimed means we're repurposing the wood. We're taking something that was used for an original purpose and bringing it back into the marketplace today. One of the things I really like about this is the availability of species that maybe I'd have a hard time buying today. So for instance, laying here on the bench, starting on this side, I've got Ponderosa Pine. Then over here toward the middle of the bench, Southern Yellow Pine. Look at the size of that chunk of wood. Then at the far end, that's a post that's made out of Doug fir. So the Southern Yellow Pine and the Doug fir, obviously structural posts of some kind in a building. The Ponderosa Pine over here, I can tell you, was originally part of a Sears Roebuck warehouse. And this was used as shelving. When the warehouse was ready to come down, they took the shelving apart and, like I said, made it available to be resold. One of the things I really like about it are the shadow lines that show up here. Shadow lines, this is where some cleats were originally fastened here. You can see we've got nail holes in here. I like incorporating that into my project. So one thing to be aware of is that if we're gonna work around defects, it's possible you're gonna lose a lot of wood cutting that stuff out. I prefer to incorporate those. I don't consider them defects, I consider them character. I think it really adds a lot, kind of a instant antique to what we're working with. The other thing that I think is really cool are the growth rings and the age of this material. Now, this board, it's a 1x12, and it split on me, but we can still see what we're looking at here, which is from the center of the board out to the edge. Look at the annual rings and how tight they are. In today's pines, it's not uncommon to see 6 to 8 growth rings in an inch of material. Here, and 5.5 inches or so of wood, there are 105 growth rings. Very, very tight rings, makes for a nice tight grain in the face of the material. The other thing that's amazing about those annual rings is that this building was built probably in the early 1900s. Let's call it 100 growth rings so the math is easy for my little head. If it was built in 1900, and I've got 100 growth rings out to here, this tree was a baby in 1800. Now, realistically, this Ponderosa pine tree, when it was harvested, could have been anywhere from 24 to 36 inches in diameter. So there's a bunch of growth rings out here we're not seeing. So maybe at the time it was cut down, this tree was 150, 200 years old, meaning that it was a baby in the 1700s. It's just so cool that I'm holding this piece of wood in my hands that was a sapling 200 years ago. What do we need to watch out for here? Well, one of the things I find with the reclaimed wood is that it does tend to be more brittle, hence my crack here, than similar woods that I might buy today. Sharp tools, taking a little more care when you're cutting. It's not a big problem, you just got to be aware of it so that you can work around that brittleness. The other thing is what's on or in the material. So for instance, we can still see some paint left over here on that big chunk of Doug fir. Is that lead-based paint? I don't know. My preference with that is I allow the supplier from whom I get this to deal with the material in their shop. They've got all the stuff in place to make sure that they're dealing with it safely so that when I get it here, the paint is gone and I don't have to worry about it. I just brought this piece in so I could talk to you about the possibility of lead-based paints. What about fasteners? If you're going to do a lot of work with reclaimed wood, you might want to invest in a metal detector so that you can run the metal detector over this, make sure that we're not going to introduce any metal as we're machining these parts. Again, in my case, my preference is to allow the supplier to do that work for me so that when I get it in the shop, I know that I'm not going to run into anything I don't want to cut on my planer or table saw or any of my other cutting tools. What you need to do if you're interested in pursuing this, like I have been, is use the internet or Yellow Pages and look for reclaimed wood suppliers. That's the category. Once you find them, give them a call, find out what they have. Depending on where you live in the country, there will be different species available to you than are available to me. Another consideration here is that from my supplier, I'm able to get 3/4 by 11s. There's a lot of dimensional lumber that's available from them. Additionally, because they have large beams like this, you can custom order what you want. So for instance, from a huge beam, I've seen this supplier go to a bandsaw mill and cut out planks that are going to become a tabletop. Lots of really interesting possibilities with this reclaimed wood. Another great benefit is that we're taking stuff that might have otherwise ended up in a compost pile and reusing it, recycling it, getting a lot more mileage out of this stuff. So one, I just think it's cool because of its age. Two, I love the shadow lines and the character that this material can bring to us. Three, I love the recycling aspect of it. Check it out. Find a supplier in your area that you can work with. Dip your toe in the waters of reclaimed lumber, and I hope you're going to like it just as much as I do.